It's time for Prove All Things, a Bible discussion program on the Word of God. A panel of preachers will deal with your questions and comments. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, abstain from all appearance of evil, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. Are we on yet?
We're on.
Hey there. This is Prove All Things, and we're looking forward to talking with you tonight about your Bible question or comment. Engineer Dave failed us last week. The affairs of this world. He departed, he loved this present world more than he loved the Lord. Or at least he loved his kids' ball games, I think, more than he loved the Lord.
Oh, now, don't say things like that.
Well, his kid, he was feeling fatherly.
And that's a good thing.
Paternal.
Well, if you would learn how to do this yourself.
I don't have any kids. I got grandkids now. You can ignore them sometimes.
You wouldn't have to count on your kids so much.
I got 14 grandkids.
You could learn to drive the computer, John.
What?
That's what he's suggesting. You could learn to drive the computer.
Oh.
I think that's what he's suggesting.
Oh.
Yeah, or get one of those 14 grandkids who probably knows more about it than Dave does.
Well, they're all playing ball.
Not all 14.
It seems like it.
Oh,
Wait a minute. Who's left on? The infants? Let's see. No, they're all playing ball.
Not Naomi.
Well, Naomi's what? 9 months old.
That's right.
So she's entitled not to play ball. The other 13 are playing ball.
Yeah. You know, I would have thought anybody in his right mind would have been satisfied with a baker's dozen. But no.
Hey, I'm praying for one more, at least. Maybe a
One
couple.
more.
Yes.
Well, we're going to have to start. We need to name them after the days of the week or something.
Anyway, this is Jeff Asher over here on my right, who has joined us tonight. Ed Rangel called me fussing last week that we weren't on, said he had a dandy question about some Bible passage.
I know he called me.
Oh, you did? Did he tell
Yes.
you? I can't remember the passage. Do you remember?
We were in Romans,
Okay.
chapter 8,
Okay.
and the creation.
Whole creation groaneth together. Yes, that passage.
Yes.
Oh, I got to introduce my other esteemed guest over here, and that is Brother, what's your name? Alan McKee.
Yeah. Who are you again?
You've only known him 50 years.
Yes, we've only lived next to one another for a good. How long have you lived over there?
Let's see. It would be 25 years in November, I think.
Okay. Well, you've almost got the house paid off now.
Just about.
You the man. Ooh, I'll move in with you when you get paid off. So, let's
So
see.
he can charge you rent.
That's right. He had a question about Romans 8 and verse what? Starting at 18.
21, I think it is.
For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. The earnest expectation of the creature, I'm reading the King James, waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. For the creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who hath subjected the same in hope. Because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. So, what do you want to know? Who the creation was?
Yes.
So,
he was reading from, I can't recall the brother's name now. It's a commentary on the book of Romans, written by one of our institutional brethren.
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't like to diss people, but it's not that good a commentary for a lot of reasons.
We're in trouble if you ever think of his name.
Yeah, I know it. But anyway,
whoever that knucklehead was.
Cottrell. That's who it was.
Whoops!
Cottrell.
You weren't supposed to say that right after I said knucklehead.
Oh, sorry. I didn't hear that remark. But anyway, but it's got a lot of problems. But that was one I had not paid any attention to, at least not in dealing with contrary views. And he takes a position there that the creation is the physical creation.
Okay.
And which, I mean, a lot of people make that mistake simply because they don't pay attention to the context. The first rule of Bible study is context.
Okay.
And all the way right up through verse 18, Paul is talking about the suffering of believers, those who are the children of God. So the earnest expectation of the creation, well, what is the creation? What's been created in this context? Well, what's been created in this context is God's people, the church. And so what are they expecting? Well, they're expecting the revealing of the sons of God. The physical earth isn't expecting the revealing of the sons of God. The only thing the physical earth is expecting is the fire of destruction, 2 Peter 3, and even to say that if the earth is expecting it is an anthropomorphism, simply because the earth, inanimate creation, isn't expecting anything. It doesn't have the intelligence to expect. So, but the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly. Does the physical creation have a will? Because of him who subjected it in hope. Does the physical creation have a hope? No. But the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. So the passage is talking about the ultimate hope that the believer has in Jesus Christ. He's talking about the resurrection from the dead. And so anyway, that's how that context develops.
Well, Alan told me he completely disagrees with that, right, Alan?
No.
You were hoping to get something started, but you didn't succeed.
I was looking back a few verses as Brother Asher has suggested. Context is important here, and if we look back just a few verses, verse 13 and 14. For if you live after the flesh, you shall die. But if through the Spirit do put to death the deeds of the body, you shall live. For as many as are led are in the Spirit, they are the sons of God. So down here, then he talks about 19. He's talking about waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God. And so by context, Brother Asher, I would suggest that you are correct that this is a reference to those who are waiting for the revelation of the Spirit.
Yes. All right, so we're on the same page here.
Isn't there anybody out there who wants to disagree? This is
I'm sure there is, but I don't know that they will.
What?
Well, John, you can
Well,
disagree.
now wait a minute. Ed is commenting.
Does Ed disagree?
Well, no, he says it was not Romans 8.
Uh-oh.
It was Romans 5, 12 through 21.
You messed
up. You know what? He's right about that.
And he says, sorry.
Somebody else called me this week about Romans 8.
Jeff has a poor memory. Romans 5.
Tell Ed he's right. I mean, that's true.
Will you hush?
Romans 5, 12 through 21. His position is that the death is physical and not spiritual death.
Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned, after the likeness of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. What did he go through, 21? Oh.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read all that.
No, but and I remember the conversation now. I've had several this week on different Bible subjects, but he's right. I have forgotten the exact passage he called me about, because he did call me about Romans 5. But I pointed out to him in that conversation, and he can correct me if I've forgotten this, but I pointed out to him that verses 13 through 17 are a parenthesis. And that if you would read verse 12 and verse 18 together, that helps eliminate some of the confusion. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned, therefore, as through one man's offense judgment came to all men, resulting in condemnation, even so through one man's righteous act, the free gift came to all men, resulting in justification. So the comparison in these verses is between two men, Christ and Adam, and each of them having done one thing that affected the whole world. Adam sinned, and as a result of that, sin entered the world. So we live in a broken world. We live in a corrupted world. We come into a world that's tainted by sin. This is why David says in Psalm 51, I was shapen in iniquity. He's not talking about being born a sinner. He's talking about being born into a world that was affected by sin. There's no way that you and I can come into existence without being affected by sin. That's greatly different than the world that Adam inherited. Now, contrasted to that, Christ came into that world that was corrupted by sin, but unlike everyone else, he did not sin. Now, that's why Paul says what he does in chapter 8, that Christ condemned sin in the flesh. How did he do that? By not sinning. But the righteous act of Christ is the act of atonement. His dying at Calvary as an atonement for our sins, so that Adam's act brought sin into the world, and the act of Christ is what makes it possible for men to be free of sin. And that's universally applicable. It's applicable to the consequences of what men do who sin, because all have sinned. You see, that's what he says. He doesn't say Adam sinned, therefore everyone's guilty. He says everyone has sinned. If universality is talking about imputation of sin and the imputation of righteousness, as many as are guilty of sin are also going to have righteousness imputed to them. And that's universalism. And so there are people who accept universalism, accept the consequences of that, but the Calvinists, who are in the vast majority in Protestant theology, reject universalism, but their doctrine argues in favor of universalism. And so Calvinists has made many universalists.
Are you just going to amen him again?
I'm just listening.
Oh. What are we?
He's not being the nodder.
That's right. This is Prove All Things, and we are here for your Bible questions or comments. Jeff over here made up one question, and he answered another one.
I just attributed it to the wrong person.
This, in case you haven't listened to us before, we will follow the chat conversation. We're on Facebook and YouTube. We'll follow the chat conversation on YouTube. We'll look at the comments. You will get your comment. You don't have to ask a question. You can object. You can fuss. Somebody told me, some guy last week, did we ever find that guy's comment? Who said we were awfully superficial, and which may be true. I'm pretty superficial.
The word he used was pablum.
Pablum, yes.
What was pablum?
Well, the program's pablum, but which I will admit to, I'm kind of one of those guys. But if you would like to harden it up, more strong meat, by all means, you don't have to ask questions. You can just teach.
Throw a comment in.
Throw a comment in. Say, hey.
So,
but anyway, this program's... give me a minute here. This program's brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ. Let me get a little plug in for the church. 3103 North High School Road in Indianapolis. And we would love to hear from you.
By the way, Lee comments and says, you're going to have to mute Jeff to get him to behave.
That's true. He wouldn't be the first. But
mute me to do what?
to get a word in edgewise.
You're the guy who asked me to be on here.
You're as bad as my wife. my wife, always says, "Why are you always yawning when I'm talking to you?" And I said, "I'm not yawning. I'm trying to get a word in."
Okay, I'm done.
No.
I'm just another pretty face from now on.
Here, you got a question.
Okay.
Ed asks on Facebook, what sin did we the people commit in verse 14? Whiteside said Adam committed a deliberate sin and the others committed a moral sin. What is a moral sin versus Adam's deliberate sin?
Okay, verse 14. Death reigned from Adam even at the likeness of Adam's transgression. You're asking us. I have heard others make a distinction between Eve's sin and Adam's sin. And the point made is from Timothy, where, let me get over there. I'm going to refer to it. Where it says the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Where is that?
1 Timothy 2:12.
Yeah, I thought so. He says, well, in there, it's Adam was first formed, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived. The woman being deceived was in the transgression. The condemnation of her is that she was the first to sin. But the remark about Adam is that he wasn't deceived. So how did he word that? Whiteside says that his sin was what?
Whiteside said Adam committed a deliberate sin.
Yeah, it was deliberate. So he knew it was wrong. He wasn't deceived. But he went ahead and did it anyway to please his wife. But I don't understand the moral sin. I don't know. I can understand the deliberate act, but
well, I think the distinction that Whiteside's making is between a positive command as opposed to a thou shalt not, like thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness. Those things we generally associate with morality. Whereas eating of the tree of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
That was a thou shalt not.
Well, I know, but the point is, it's not a. There doesn't seem to be anything moral attached to it. It's like the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week. You do it on the first day because that's what God said. It's just a positive commandment. This is what I want you to do. It doesn't have anything to do with what we could define as morality, like adultery or lying or stealing or drunkenness or whatever. I kind of think that's a distinction that is drawing a fine line.
That second half of the Ten Commandments. The second list.
So I don't like to talk about that kind of distinction. I think you're on the right track with deceived as opposed to not deceived.
Yeah.
Adam sinned with his eyes wide open.
Yeah. It was deliberate. So, but I don't. Whiteside must have been making some use of the word moral. I don't fathom. And I suspect there's a lot of things I say people don't fathom either. Alan, what are you going to do over there? Come on here.
I'm just listening and contemplating everything.
Oh my goodness.
Ed says, yes, a positive command. Sure am glad Jeff is on. A positive command, a positive command versus a moral command of the law from Adam to Moses, as in verse 14.
Chapter 5.
Yeah, I guess he's back in chapter 5.
Yeah, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who had not sinned according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam. All right. You didn't have a codified law until Moses gave it. However, the problem I have with that is that adultery was wrong before Moses said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery."
Mm-hmm.
Stealing was wrong. Murder was wrong. Those commandments existed. They didn't exist in codified form. And if the comparison is between, in chapter 5, it seems to be maybe the comparison is between Adam and the Jewish people, so there might be the distinction, something as a law written down as opposed to a law that was not written down. I don't know that that's the answer, though. But in 1 Timothy 2, the distinction is clearly between Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And that predates any Mosaic law or any written law at all. Certainly, I think it's implied when Cain slew Abel, and Cain said, well, every man's hand is going to be against me. He understood that he had committed a crime or sin worthy of death. And then God put the mark on him as a manifestation of his grace to not kill to not kill Cain.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still some aspects of that I don't necessarily fully understand or want to explore necessarily.
So it's saying the similitude. What is the Revised Version? The New American Standard say that.
Yeah, that's chapter 5. After the similitude,
5:14
the
says
likeness
of
the
the offense
transgression
of Adam. So he's saying that the likeness is deliberate.
If we compare it to 1 Timothy 2, yes.
Yeah. But then
and I don't know what else if we compare it to the law, I don't see how it lacks being deliberate. It's just the command that he violated was, thou shalt not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's not a part of the 10 Commandments.
No.
But that's just, as I said before, it's just a positive command. It's something that God said, this is what I want done.
Well, I would assume Eve sinned through gullibility, through deception, through ignorance, through that. And so those who sin not after the similitude of Adam would be people who sinned in all the other ways you can sin.
That's what I would say, yes. And I don't think the point of the statement is anything other than the fact to affirm that men have always been under some form of law from God, and it is a transgression of God's law, whether written or unwritten.
Well, one of the points I've always made about this verse is that sin existed, and Adam had nothing to do with everybody else who sinned necessarily.
That's the point. That's the point of the context, yes. He brought sin into the world. His act was the occasion whereby sin entered the world.
Yeah.
And the act of Christ is the occasion whereby grace entered the world. That's the point of the comparison in the context. He's not talking about imputation, which is what the Calvinist wants to make it. And if it is that, then he's faced with the consequence of his position, which is, if everybody has the guilt of Adam, then everybody has the righteousness of Christ. There's no way, because they are comparative as effect.
Yeah.
The effect of both was a universal effect.
Mm-hmm.
If the effect of Adam's sin is universal guilt, then the effect of Christ's righteous act has to be universal salvation. And that's something the Calvinist is not willing to accept.
Yeah. Let me make an announcement while I'm thinking about it, lest I forget. Many of you who are listening knew Pat Farish, who died last year. You perhaps also knew his wife, Frances Farish, who suffered a stroke, I believe Saturday night. Maybe Saturday afternoon. I don't know exactly the time on Saturday. And is still in the hospital, having good days and bad days. There was scheduled a memorial service in Fort Worth for Pat. She's very concerned, and I can understand it. Because of COVID, there wasn't any funeral, there wasn't any remembrance of her husband, and she really wants that to happen, and I think she'd really like to be there. So they have canceled that, but I would encourage you to offer prayers for Frances Farish and hopefully her continued health, that she'll rebound from this and be well. But anyway, I wanted to mention that. So, are you going to get in this thing?
Well, I'm about to jump in if you want me to.
Okay, well, jump in. There you are. You got your hair combed for once.
Yeah,
and
I'm
got on your green shirt. And
trying to look respectable.
yes.
I'll give you some of my thoughts on these passages, and that is that, as you say, and as Jeff has indicated, that they did not sin in the likeness of Adam, that Adam's sin was deliberate. It was a deliberate sin, but if I read, here's Genesis 6, verse 5. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And so there is evil, but, did these folks know that what they were doing was evil? Did they have a guide? Did they have understanding? We understand that Cain had come to know that by murdering his brother he had done wrong. But if I don't know fornication is wrong and I'm fornicating, I'm still in sin, correct? But if I have no instruction, I don't know that it's wrong, okay? Or if I'm stealing and I have no instruction that stealing is wrong, then what do I do with that? Or if I want to...
By instruction, you mean that there is a law.
Yeah, that there is a law, exactly. Yeah, that there is a law.
My ignorance of the word stop on a sign does not make me free of driving through a stop sign.
That's right. The fact that, maybe you're dyslexic and you see,
pots.
Yeah, or pots, yeah. Or maybe you have trouble with numbers and you see that sign that says 40 and you think that's 80 or something like that, or for the speed limit. No, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't relieve me from my responsibility.
What I take from Romans then is that it says sin, that death entered through one man. Why? Because all sinned. Okay, so there's the source of why all die, is because all sin. And so I think therefore it is talking about a spiritual condition rather than a physical one. That they all sin. Now through righteousness then comes in from one man. Is that does that righteousness flow to us automatically? I would say no, it does not any more than the sin flows to us automatically. There's a condition required for us to die spiritually, and that is we have to sin. Since we are going to sin, we're going to die spiritually. But righteousness is available through Jesus Christ. Is it flowing to us automatically or without condition? I don't believe so. Obviously not. There are conditions for that, but it's available. It is available. So when you talk about universal, I would say it's universally available. It's not universally granted, but it is universally available. What did Peter say? To Cornelius, that in every nation he that feareth him is accepted to him, or God is no respecter of persons.
Yeah.
And all that. So it is available to all men. God is not willing that any should perish, that all would come to salvation.
Engineer Dave, I got the impression that Ed was arguing, maybe arguing might be too strong, that this passage in Romans 5 was talking about physical death. Is that true?
I don't know if I got that from him, but from
what it said.
The Romans 5?
Yeah.
He said the position is that the death is physical and not spiritual death.
So he's saying Cottrell argued it was physical death?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
He also comments one more time. He says, I see that Adam did not have a sinful nature, but was subject to sin. We don't have a sinful nature, but are subject to sin.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that position of it being a physical death, because we have infants that die a physical death. Yet these infants have committed no sin, and therefore they are not sinners. And
why did the infants die?
Why do the infants die?
I ask you.
Well, they die because we are separated from the tree of life, but not because of their own sin, any inherited sin.
And that was the point I made to Ed, to go back to Genesis 3. I think there's a general misunderstanding among folks that somehow physical death is the punishment for sin. And that leads into, this is always the discussion I have with people about the atonement of Christ. And this is why we get some of the views that some of our brethren have taken up about, well, Jesus suffered infinitely in a moment of time to get some kind of spiritual component into the death of Christ. But physical death is not the punishment for sin. Physical death is just another aspect of the grace of God. For if man did not sin, the passage says, lest he put forth his hand and live forever. And he's describing a sinner. So if the sinner lived forever, there's no possibility of Christ dying for the sinner. You see, physical death is a part of the redemptive scheme. I don't profess to know all of the ins and outs of it, but other than, and this is that quotation that was made of mine during the debate from Watson. He never did understand what I was saying. And this is the very point that I was making in that sermon. If I know that Christ died for my sins, that's all I have to understand about the atonement. I don't have to do the math. I don't have to get into the mind of God and understand how it is that is in his divine and infinite wisdom, the physical death of his Son is sufficient to forgive the sins of the world. I just need to know that's what God said, you see. And I don't have to create some kind of mechanism whereby Christ, as an individual, infinitely suffers for the totality of humanity, and somehow that mystical suffering that took place someplace where I don't know or the Bible doesn't tell me about, this suffering that they make up is equivalent to all the sins of the world. The Bible doesn't teach that. The Bible just simply says that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish. And that's what I've got to believe about the death of Jesus. I don't have to figure out why. I just have to believe God and what he said about it. And this is why we have so much error in the world about the death of Jesus, because people are not willing to be, and this is that fellow who said this was pablum, this is about as simple as it gets. I just believe what God said about it. I don't have to understand it. I don't have to figure it out. I don't have to do the math on it. How is it that the death of one Hebrew carpenter equals all the sins of Jews and Gentiles for all humanity, including the 7 billion currently on the planet? I don't know. I don't know.
So, Alan,
but God said it does.
You would say that all men physically die for the same reason that those children die.
Yes.
Yes.
They don't die because of their sins.
That's correct.
No. They die because that's what God said would happen in order to save the world.
Except for those guys who decide to commit suicide or drink themselves to death.
Well, no, that's still the consequence. They're going to die whether they drink themselves to death or not. But you see, that was the point Jesus was making about those fellows upon whom the Tower of Siloam fell. Were they worse sinners than anybody else?
No.
No. What about the ones who got their blood sprinkled on the altar by Pilate? Were they worse sinners than anybody? No. Why? Because sinners die.
All righty. What do you got over there, Engineer Dave?
Well, we got several comments here. Number one, Ed says he has a Zoom class every Tuesday with several Calvinists. I believe is why he's asking these questions.
Okay.
And then Larry says, to back up Alan, Paul said the law of Moses is that by which he knew covetousness was wrong. 1 Corinthians 7.
Yep.
But whether deliberate or by ignorance will result in separation. The same as will result in separation. the same as ignorance is not an excuse.
That's not 1 Corinthians 7, is it?
No, Romans 7:10.
Romans 7.
Larry says 1 Corinthians 7.
Well, he probably just made a mistake.
Okay. God commands all to repent. Lee says it seems that some are confused because they take the position that the context is referring to what was introduced, and so they say physical death was introduced because of Adam's sin. I don't take that position, but that's what I've heard. And then Lee also says Adam was physically separated from God, driven out of the garden.
Now, the passage says, though,
I don't think, excuse
through
me.
one man's sin entered the world, and death through sin.
Let me add something here. I don't think that last statement is right. I don't believe Adam or men were separated from God because they were cast out of the garden. They were separated from the garden, but I still would think that people can be in touch with God as a result of the blood of Christ. I don't perceive myself as separated from Him. Were we separated from Him?
Well, we're not, but perhaps Adam was, because there was no mechanism, no process for forgiveness for him.
Well, he had to have been forgiven.
Yeah, he had to have been forgiven, but
How so? How do you figure?
well, he was forgiven by the blood of Christ. But my point is, he still had the right of prayer. He still worshipped. He still obeyed God, and so God's commands were still made known to him. Even later in the law, God's commands were made known to them through the prophets and through the patriarchs and then through Moses.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know exactly what separated from God there means. I know this passage in Isaiah is true. Your sins and your iniquities are separated between you and your God.
Yeah.
But this is not to say that, for instance, I can't go back to the Garden of Eden. I'd have no right to the tree of life. I have no right to the knowledge of good and evil. I assume that I know those things, know good and evil, but I have no right to the tree of life. So I'm separated from that. But it did not separate me from contact with God. Did it?
No, and here again, this is what people misunderstand. There in Genesis 3, the intimation is that God walked in the garden in the cool of the day, and so therefore Adam and Eve had some sort of physical contact with God.
Okay.
While they were without sin. But once they were guilty of sin, that changed. And so they were removed from the garden as a consequence of that, because lest they put forth their hand and live forever. That necessarily comes to all of us because we are the progeny of Adam and Eve. But that's not separation from God in the sense of being out of fellowship with God. In the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die, I believe refers not physical death, but to spiritual death. The idea of alienation from God. In Genesis 3, God indicates that that's going to be restored on the basis of what the seed of the woman does. And then animal sacrifice is instituted. We see that throughout the Old Testament coming up to the time of Christ, indicating a restoration of relationship based upon atonement. But it's not the full restoration of relationship or the full essence of that relationship that we're going to be in the presence of God. That's what the resurrection is for. That's what the change is for. And boy, that was the thing that Watson never did get in the debate.
Okay. Yes, it may be we're talking about two senses of separation here. That separation spiritually and the separation physically. for instance, Moses spoke with God, he says, face to face. I don't know exactly what that means.
He spoke to the Shekinah.
Yeah. So there was some contact there. The prophets spoke with God. God spoke to them, through them. And, of course, you come to the New Testament, same sort of thing. But we're not separated from God in the sense that we cannot pray to Him and He hear our prayers and answer our prayers, and not separated in the sense that He's not aware of what we're doing. And for instance, He tells Cornelius, your prayers and alms came up as a memorial before God. So anyway, go ahead, Engineer Dave.
Just a few other comments. Lee says, I'm not arguing this. I'm saying what I've been told. I believe Romans 5 talks about spiritual death.
Okay.
And Ed, hold on, I got to make sure I send all this. And Ed quips, he says, I'm glad I was able to introduce a shallow topic this evening.
Well,
yes, I've been thinking that for quite a while now.
we need more shallow topics. Ed, I thought didn't he say he had a Zoom study to go to or something tonight?
No, on Tuesday nights he has it's really interesting. He started this back when COVID came on. He got into a group with about 15 or so Calvinists of different denominations, but having their Calvinism in common. Some of them left the group because they were strict 5-point Calvinists, and so took the position that you couldn't. There wasn't any salvation to be offered to people who weren't elected. They were primitive Baptists, and so some of the Calvinists disagreed amongst themselves. The fifth point was they weren't quite as strong on that total depravity thing, see?
Uh-huh.
So they fell out over that, and he's made some progress in studying with him, but this chapter 5 thing was what came up last week, and that's what he was, he even begged off, said, let me study a little bit before I go any further, which that's always the right thing to do. If you don't know the answer, don't bluff, just say, look, I got to go study. And, but it's
he's saying it's at 7 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is the 8 o'clock our time. So,
yeah.
So he'll be starting in about 15 or so minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're working up his notes for him.
Yeah, yeah. We're doing his prep.
Okay. Go ahead.
Larry comments about the Adam and forgiveness, and he says it doesn't say, but I assume Adam repented as his son Seth after the fact was very faithful. I remember Paul saying to Timothy that genuine faith was instilled in him by his grandmom. Probably the same here.
All right.
And Rita comments, let me send that one. Rita comments and says, if a man's sin is what ushered in physical death, did that also affect the rest of God's creation because all things die, animals, plants, etc.?
I don't. Okay, Rita, thank you. I don't know what you're implying is. I think you're talking about physical death, and one man's sin sort of caused physical death because he was cast out of the garden, and the only thing that allowed us to live apparently was the tree of life, which we had access to. Now, cast out, we don't. I don't know whether the animals had right to the tree of life. I don't know whether the animals were going to live forever. So that's what I think you're implying, is that somehow or another all the animals were going to live forever too. And there's nothing in the Bible that says that. Those skins that God taught Adam and Eve to wear after they did this had to come from somewhere, and so there was some death on the part of some animals there. So I don't know why you would reason that animals had right to the tree of life. I don't know. What do you think? Or for that matter, trees were going to live forever, or grass, or flowers.
I'm inclined to agree with you.
He tells Adam, here's another thought. He tells Adam to tend the garden. What tending would there be if it couldn't die?
Yeah. I mean, the only change that seems to have come along is that God cursed the earth.
Yeah.
And then after the flood, God said he wouldn't curse the earth anymore. So, whatever that meant. There's just a lot of things I'm not sure I know all the answers to.
He cursed the earth with briars. I don't know whether there were briars before or not, but there sure are now.
Yes. So, I mean, we don't have all these answers because the scriptures don't provide all the answers. And that doesn't mean it's wrong to ask the questions. It just means that we need to be careful about any conclusions we draw because we have an unanswered question or a speculative answer to a question.
Yeah.
Clearly, in Romans 5, death passed to all men, and I get it, because all have sinned. Now, it's either they sinned in Adam, and I know some brethren take that position. They either sinned in Adam, and thus Adam's sin, the consequences are imputed, or each individual sins. And because all have sinned, all in the context, all men have sinned. Well, going back to Alan's point, infants do not die because they've sinned. See, there's just no way in the world to make that work. So you either take the imputed guilt theory, or you recognize that it's talking about spiritual death, and that comes upon those who have sinned. And it's not all is always unlimited in its context, but limited by its context. It's the all that sin that die.
Well, there's another point I think to be made here. Jesus didn't die because of his sin.
No.
He was sinless. But it is appointed, that's what he says in Hebrews, it's appointed unto men once to die. And he was a man, so he had to die.
Yeah. And that takes us back to the point I made earlier. If men did not die, then Jesus could not die for them.
There you go. Good point.
Thank you.
What a guy. Engineer Dave, where are we here?
We're in Indianapolis.
Oh. So have we given full satisfaction so far?
Well, there's one more comment. Gerald comments, he says, there's no example of anything dying before Adam's sin.
Well, as far as I know, Adam was the only man there was.
Well, he said anything. Animals. We were talking about animals.
Oh,
so
anything died.
Yes, he implies that the animals were going to live forever.
That doesn't follow. That's a non sequitur. The fact that the scriptures are silent on the matter doesn't prove that that's the case.
Yes, the creation of man was different than the animals.
Yes, and that's specified in the text.
So, I'm trying to think. All of these goofy things come into your head, conjecture about this. For instance, the lions and tigers and bears, what did they eat? I've heard a lot of people imply that they eat grass. They didn't eat other animals.
Well, I know I know that man didn't eat meat.
Yes.
Genesis 9 indicates that what is this? I'm giving you the herb of the field for food. But then in Genesis, let's see. Let's just do it this way. Maybe it'd be easier.
Well, for that matter, the fish.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the fish ate. That's the other. You got to be careful about that. It's talking about
the Bible
beasts of the field and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but the Bible does says that the beast in what is it, Jude, James, somewhere, said the animals were made to be taken and destroyed.
Yeah.
So
Genesis, let's just give these verses. Genesis 2:9 says, every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. And then Genesis 3:6, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, of course, that's talking about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then in Genesis 6, talking to Noah, take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for them and for thee and for them. And that certainly implies in the ark fodder and vegetable food. And really, that's the only instances that are that talk about for food in those early passages.
Gerald comments and says the first example of dying was when God sacrificed an animal for the covering for Adam and Eve.
Yeah, well, I mentioned that earlier. The covering for Adam and Eve, the skins that they were given to wear.
Yeah. Just looking here, I was looking a little further. Let's see, here it is, maybe. Yeah. But the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. And that's Genesis 9. That's the passage I was talking about before. That at that point, God gave man the beasts of the field, but specified that they not eat the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there you have the formal institution of animal sacrifice after the flood in that passage.
You wouldn't argue it was formal in the case of Cain and Abel?
Well, I would argue that, but I mean, you have, and I've had brethren argue against it, but I think I'm right about it. But there's no question about it in Genesis 9, though. I think animal sacrifice was. I think the implication is it was instituted even before Cain and Abel.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point of that narrative in Genesis 4 is not about the institution of animal sacrifice. It's about Cain's attitude toward it, and the fact he wasn't willing to submit to God's commandments. Some more of that positive command we were talking about earlier. But I mean, I would argue that
his own works were evil, whereas his brothers were righteous.
Yes, and the righteousness that Abel had was the righteousness of faith. You see,
yeah,
and that's really the point of a positive command. It's a test of faith. Another perfect example of a positive command is water baptism. Now, I could sit here and explicate for over an hour on all the reasons why that are assigned to water baptism in Scripture. It's for remission of sins. It's unto life, and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is, it's a positive command that God has given. Now, either I believe God or I don't. Either believe what Jesus said or I don't. He that believes and is baptized shall be saved. That's the bottom line. And who's going to keep? The believer's going to keep that. The man who loves God is going to keep his commandments. The man who, regardless of how foolish or whatever he may think it is. Of course, if you're really obeying, you don't think it's foolish.
All right.
What's wrong?
It's your turn. You've been quiet for long enough.
No, not at all. But that's the that's the point. That I was reading here what Gerald goes on to say is talking about that by that example. It was not until after man sinned that there was the shedding of blood. And he's making the idea, given the idea that because of the shedding of, that the man could not be reconciled with God until the shedding of blood. And I'm not sure we can go that far in the case of Adam and Eve, but certainly the Bible teaches us that that was part of the purpose of the sacrifices in the Old Testament, was to foreshadow the shedding of blood on the cross by Jesus Christ.
Okay. Okay, Engineer Dave, we just got a minute or two. What else you got over there?
Gerald comments, he says, this represents the ultimate sacrifice of the Lamb of God being sacrificed for our sin. Life is in the blood.
Yes, that's Leviticus 17:11.
And I don't know who Brandon is, and I don't know if this is some kind of a joke, but he says, who are these jokers?
Jeff Asher is a gospel preacher in Nacogdoches, Texas, and a pretty good Bible student. Alan McKee is a joker, is a pastor, an elder at the High School Road Church, as am I, John Welch. Some of these people, I don't know all of these people. Ed Rangel is a preacher in Hueytown, Alabama. And Larry is a preacher in Canada, the far north of Canada, as I remember. Who else? Lee is a preacher in Arkansas, isn't he?
Yeah, South Central.
Yeah. And Gerald, I don't know exactly who Gerald is, but he's called our program many times. And I suspect he's a preacher somewhere.
He's a regular.
He's a sort of a regular commenter. So, were there any other jokers that he could? And Rita is apparently a Christian, and has called the program several times.
But we invite everybody, anybody.
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to. You don't have to take anything to heart here. You're welcome to call. You can be one of the jokers. So, we're equal opportunity on that. It has been good to be with you tonight. We're winding down. How's Randy Harshberger? Jeff, Randy's the preacher down there.
Randy's making a great recovery. He was released, it's been 2 weeks now from the hospital.
He was how long? He was in a long time.
Oh man, he was in for 7 weeks. And he's in his 9th week of recovery. He started physical therapy on an outpatient basis. He's doing much, much better. I think he's going to make a full recovery.
Okay, is he back preaching yet?
No. He's doing good to stand up.
Okay then. All right.
But he's, compared to the fact that he was prone for about 6 weeks, that's good.
Hey, you teach a class, or you used to teach a class to a lot of young men, many of whom are preachers, studying various books of the Bible. You got any plans about that?
Well, we had some plans, and then COVID just kind of wrecked all of them, and we're just kind of waiting to see now. I hope that by next year I'll be back on schedule.
All right. Tomorrow night we're going to be studying in the 10th chapter of Mark, High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road. And we'll have a class as well in Spanish, led by Brother Andres Pong. And there'll be classes for all ages. And on Sunday at 9:30, Alan McKee over here is going to be teaching a Bible class in
Titus.
The first chapter.
Yes.
Going into the second?
No, I've got to go back into the first chapter. I've got a question that's been raised to me about one of the qualifications for an elder that I need to, that reminds me I need to reference a article that your son wrote. So I'll look at that.
All right. And then at 10:30 we'll have worship service. Again at 6 in the evening we'll have another worship service. And we would appreciate having you with us. Come on out. Everybody's welcome. We're still trying to be as safe as we can. Most of us wear, in fact, I think everybody pretty well wears a mask. and tries as much as we can to socially distance. But anyway, we're looking forward to seeing you there. Good to have you tonight, Jeff.
Thank you.
Always good to have you, Alan.
Glad to be here.
And if the Lord wills, we'll be back with you again next week. Good evening to you.